I'm just not going to do it. I can't do it. I'm too overwhelmed. And frankly, I don't have time. And that would lead to clutter, like just more and more clutter, because my life would start to just pile up on me and I couldn't seem to get a handle on it. So then guess what happened? I'd get overwhelmed. And so it was like overwhelm, avoidance, clutter, overwhelm, avoidance, clutter. And it would just go on and on and on. And of course, it would get worse.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. A Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges, spirituality, ADHD, or maybe just family, travel, and logistics. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison, with your mystery meat sandwich.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Eternally Amy from Jail to Joy. I'm Amy Liz Harrison, as you know. And today, for the mystery meat sandwich, I have a quote by Mark Twain. With courage, you will dare to take risks, have the strength to be compassionate, and the wisdom to be humble. Courage is the foundation of integrity. So in the 12-step community, May is the integrity month. May talks a lot in meetings about the 5th step. And so in the 4th step, which obviously comes right before the 5th step, in the 4th step, what we do is a personal housekeeping. We take a personal inventory of all of our resentments, basically, that we've collected up until this point. And then we get the help of a sponsor or a spiritual guide or a mentor in our 5th step. And we have that person help us sort through all of the baggage and all of the pieces of dirty laundry that we have dumped in front of this person and just said, I don't know how to deal with this. Help me figure this out so I can live a sober life and be a contributing member to society in a positive way. And I know for me, the deal was I was ready. I had the gift of desperation. And that is also, of course, an acronym for God, G-O-D. I had that gift of desperation that I was willing to go to any length and to do whatever it took. And I let that sponsor see all my dirty laundry and poke through it and help me to decide what stayed and what should go and how to look at some of the resentments I had from another perspective. So in order to do that, what she needed to do is she needed for me to dump out that dirty laundry, because you have to know what you're dealing with. And so that translates into my life in so many ways today. But one of those ways is by looking at my ADHD and my different mental health challenges that I have. And I have to know what I'm dealing with first. And it kind of reflects back to the first step that I have to know the problem before I know what the solution is, right? I have to know what I'm dealing with. Why is my life unmanageable right now? What is this powerlessness, right? And how do I get that power back? Well, the first step is by knowing what it is that has made me have that powerlessness in my life in the area of drinking and whatever else I'm dealing with at the time, because it's all areas of unmanageability when it's completely infiltrated my life and taken over to the point where I can't manage my own life, right? And so that was something in the 12-step community I had to just really come to terms with was the fact that I could not manage my own life, which is kind of embarrassing, but it's a great starting place. It's the perfect starting place. So, knowing what you're dealing with is a big, big deal. And I'll share a little story as I wrap up this mystery meat sandwich. So, in 2007, I broke my leg and I had hardware put in. And when you leave the hospital, they kind of give you this list with some serial numbers on it. And they say, hey, this is what's in your leg now. So you have a record of it. And a few years later, after I got sober in 2011, I went to go get the hardware out. And the person who did the surgery originally was no longer he was doing the surgeries. He was no longer taking my insurance. And so I thought, oh, you know what? Forget it. I'll just go to some rando. I'm sure it's one size fits all, whatever. I have since learned that is not necessarily the case. And it ended up that I had the first surgeon do it because a lot of times people will come from other countries. Maybe the particular hardware that someone has in their body is old or is no longer made or is not originally from this country. It's from another country. And so they get in there and they're looking at the hardware going, what is this? And how can I improvise and get this out? And so if it's possible to know what you're dealing with, it's just much easier. And so I ended up having the original surgeon who placed the hardware take the hardware out. And it went super smoothly. Everything went along swimmingly. And that was that. I didn't have any issues after that. So it's good to know what you're dealing with.
And now, onto the chaplain's chat.
So the topic for today is changing the narrative on clutter. This is about ADHD specifically, which many of you know that I have, and I was diagnosed at midlife after thinking that I had postpartum depression only and did not want to admit that perhaps I should be tested for ADHD, and I avoided getting tested for long periods of time. I thought it was kind of a silly idea for me to be tested for ADHD because I thought, that's for little boys. That's for off the wall, can't stay in my seat little boys. And my psychiatrist patiently waited for me to become willing to get tested for ADHD, which I did, which I was off the charts. And I got a second opinion, got another psychiatrist to look at my results and take a whole different set of tests. And I completely had it there as well. And so it wasn't really a question. But every time I've received a diagnosis, it's actually been extremely empowering once I get over this whole, there's nothing wrong with me. Why do I need to take a test for this? And I'll tell myself all these different things about why I don't need to get tested for something. When the reality is, I have found looking back, it is so empowering to get a diagnosis because then you know what you're dealing with. And in my case, ADHD accounts for so many things in my life that I could not for the life of me figure out why I was such a slacker, why I was kind of organically a little bit clutterier than my husband, all these different things, why I had a racing monkey mind when my husband or my close friends could just sit down and study and it was no problem. And I had to kind of wait to get motivated or try to motivate myself. So ADHD, really learning about it, answered so many questions about myself. And that was empowering. And so, what I wanted to talk about today, because I just launched this book, Eternally Awkward, it talks a lot about my embarrassing moments along the way and trying to figure out exactly what it was that was making me, in my mind, so crazy or so different from the other kids growing up or from my peers or other moms when I first had little kids. So I'm calling this knowing what you're dealing with and changing the narrative on clutter. When I say clutter, of course, that can be defined as many different things. I'm talking for me about not a magazine perfect house. That's what I'm talking about. And so for some people, clutter may be their glasses are laying out on the counter in the bathroom on the wrong side of the sink. They prefer to have them in, the corner adjacent to the mirror, whatever it is. So I'm talking about this wasteland between essentially that, like things that are very pretty well not cluttered for most average citizens, and hoarding. Okay. So I'm talking about the place in between that. And for me, I had never been the tidiest person ever, but I was pretty tidy on the whole in terms of I knew where my stuff was for the most part. Sometimes I didn't, but I would let the week kind of pile up. So this is like when I was in elementary school, high school, and college. And then always I would have about a weekly afternoon where anything that was kind of really bothering me or piles or cluttering my mind or random coffee cups that didn't need to be there, all of that would get put away. So without even knowing what it was, that's how I began to manage it. And I had found for me that I would get in this cycle of, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. So whatever was going on in my life, I'm, oh, I'm overwhelmed. It's this clutter. It's just overwhelming me, but I am so busy. I don't have time to deal with it. And in the program, we say like first things first in the 12-step community. And so the idea is take care of the actual root of what is bothering you first, the thing that is holding you back first, the thing that you need to do first, and then do the other things, right? And so I would get caught in this cycle of doom, this apple beach ball of hell, right? Where it would be like, I'm overwhelmed. I'd have overwhelm. And that would lead to over here is avoidance. Well, I'm just not going to do it. I can't do it. I'm too overwhelmed. And frankly, I don't have time. And that would lead to clutter, like just more and more clutter, because my life would start to just pile up on me and I couldn't seem to get a handle on it. So then guess what happened? I'd get overwhelmed. And so it was like overwhelm, avoidance, clutter, overwhelm, avoidance, clutter. And it would just go on and on and on. And of course, it would get worse. And so, really, what I needed to do was have somebody first say, you know what? It's okay. Everybody has a little bit of clutter in their life at some level, whatever that looks like for them. So maybe for some people, it's as put together as their black t-shirts are in a certain order, and maybe that is an out of order position that one t-shirt is in. It doesn't have to necessarily be something that the average person might define as clutter. What I need to do in order to talk about how I kind of worked my way through this, once I had a diagnosis of ADHD and talked a lot to my psychiatrist about clutter, how I used to deal with it before I had the diagnosis, from when I was a kid all the way up. And I won't go through all that cradle to the grave today, but I will give you a few highlights and then 3 suggestions about how to deal with it if you do have ADHD, or if you know somebody or live with somebody who has ADHD. Okay. So when I very first got married, I'm going to start there because I just have some good examples there that help to kind of illustrate what I went through. I had a very put together house at that point. Well, I was just starting out, right? So I didn't have a ton of stuff. Andrew and I had just gotten married. We had, some new dishes, great gifts, all this stuff from other people. But we figured out how to deal with that, where it could go. Of course, we were living in Silicon Valley at the time. So our place was really small. And I'm pretty sure, stored some stuff at my parents' house from memory. Thanks, mom and dad. Hashtag appreciate it. But, we had a handle on it because we didn't have that much. And we also didn't have a ton of money. And Silicon Valley is not the world's cheapest place to live. Also, Silicon Valley was not really the place where country music or country decor was very prevalent. And I liked country decor. I had been through a country music phase, very short lived, in college. And I had since kind of put that aside, but I really liked country decor. I had had a good friend whose mom was into country decor, and her house just looked awesome. And it felt really good all the time. It gave off this vibe of just hospitality and welcome. And you just felt comfortable there to walk in and help yourself to the freezer to see if there were maybe any peanut butter cups in there. I don't know. It just gave off a good vibe. And so when Andrew and I kind of started doing the house up, by house, I mean 900 square foot apartment built in the 50s. But I digress. So I found this store that I loved, and it was called Country Clutter. So I don't know if any of you out there remember Country Clutter, but I loved that place. And what I loved about it was it gave off that same vibe that my friend's mom had in her house, where you just walked in and there were these cute signs all over the place. There would be like a heart sign. There'd be a sign that said, welcome home, whatever. And those were kind of my values, right? Like that's how I wanted my house to feel. And so by having those signs and by purchasing some of those items and putting them in my own home, I constantly had my values in front of me, in my face, kind of thing. And it gave me comfort. It made me feel taken care of and like I knew what our family life was about, is kind of the best way I can describe it. And so when I had kids, fast forward to later, boy, there's a lot of stuff that comes with kids, right? Just a lot of stuff. If you've ever traveled with kids, with small children, like I don't have to explain it to you. And that's an entirely separate episode about kids and their stuff, right? Especially traveling with kids, as we did quite a bit, being that my husband is in the airline industry. So we were used to having a lot of stuff. And so essentially, by that point, by the time we had now moved to Washington, we had a bigger house, we had a baby on the way, my first baby. We were collecting more gifts from people, baby layette items and baby toys and gear, strollers, car seats, high chairs, whatever kind of accoutrements were coming at that time. We had them all. And so I started to get a little bit overwhelmed by my stuff, right? And so before the baby came along, I had washed all of her clothes in Dreft or whatever it's called, whatever that baby detergent is. And everything was all laid out perfectly in her closet. And then once the baby came along, it was like I was busy, man, and it was hard for me to stay on top of all of that. So that's when I first started to feel overwhelmed. And then as a result, I would just avoid doing some of that stuff and it would back up again. And it would, on the weekends, I would try and play catch up, but didn't really want to use the weekends for that because Andrew was home and on and on and on. So, what would that lead to? More clutter, right? Overwhelm, avoidance, clutter. Then, when my kids, of course, I had four small kids in a very short amount of time. In 5 years, I had four little kids, 5.5 years. And I mean, all of the stuff to go with all of those kids, plus just kind of that pile of stuff that they had outgrown that I never really got around to dealing with. I mean, it was just an overwhelming life in general, but then add their stuff in and it was crazy making, right? Like it was just bedlam. And so part of the deal at that time, and if you know my sobriety story or listen to the very first podcast episodes where I tell it, was, I had this comparison thing going on where all my friends at church, like they had these magazine perfect homes and they were just immaculate all the time. You could just bust in there at any point during the day. Their home would be totally picked up. It was just this perfect looking space. And I just didn't have that. Well, I also had twice the amount of kids most of my buddies had, and in some cases, three times the amount of kids my buddies had. And I'm not trying to blame kids for my issues, but I am saying it contributed to a lot of the overwhelm and a lot of feeling out of control. That was difficult. That was a difficult time period in my life because it started to affect my self-esteem. I ended up drinking a lot to try and change the way I felt, just to cope. And none of this was my kids' fault, was anybody's fault. It was just the tornado of circumstances, right? It was the big storm that was brewing. That led me to being able to embrace a little bit more when I got sober, embrace my clutter or my disorganization, and know that I was just doing my best at that point. I was just trying my very best. I was trying to see myself for who I was and not who I thought I should be in terms of organization. And really, when I got that diagnosis of ADHD, it was like, oh, it made so much sense. And it helps just really put those puzzle pieces together. And the things that I had struggled with my whole life, it was like pulling the curtain back, right? And just seeing behind the Wizard of Oz's situation and looking at him sitting there with all the push button maneuvers and levers and pulleys and just going, oh, okay. So that all makes sense. Now, I will say this is that what really gave me license and freedom, particularly in sobriety, when I was working on myself and really going to a lot of therapy and trying to rebuild my self esteem through esteemable acts, going to a lot of meetings, doing the step work, what really helped support me was my husband, who was not irritated by the clutter as much as I was irritated by the clutter. I internalized it. I thought it made me a bad mom, a bad wife. I think I had this attachment to thinking that maybe I was lazy because I had some piles around. We moved houses a bunch of times to get to where we are today because we kept having more kids. And so we'd move and there'd be a big old box in the corner of our master bedroom, primary bedroom, that would stay forever. And it would literally become a part of the permanent furniture in my room. It would be this static clutter box that would never change. And I would just not even see it anymore. And that's kind of like the danger zone when I get out of the habit of doing a weekly kind of check in, clean up, save myself from getting totally buried and overwhelmed, right? That feeling of being overwhelmed. Because when I would feel overwhelmed, I would just feel completely underwater, like I just could not get any air. Back to my husband, he said to me, it doesn't really bother me because it's just signs that you're here. And I love that. I love that you're in my life and you're here and you're sober, you're working on yourself. I don't mind if there are some piles around. I don't really care. What a gift that was. I just need to give him a shout out. And if you're lucky enough to have some support like that in your life and you have ADHD, well, props, big fat props, because it's a gift. It is such a gift to have somebody who doesn't come down on you and try and shame you and try and make you feel like complete crap for not being super, put together and type A and super meticulously organized. What a gift. Hashtag thanks, Andrew. And so here's the deal, is that this is how I got to the point where I was able to start getting out of that cycle of doom in 3 ways. And they are 3 C's. Okay. So it's compare and despair. So I learned to look at other people and see what they were doing. And I completely despaired over how wonderful their life was looking, at least to me from the outside. I had to eliminate that completely. So elimination of that compare and despair. Okay. It is apples and oranges. We have totally separate lives. We're totally separate people. We have separate needs. And somewhere along the way, we as a society, or at least the society and demographic that I'm in, adopted this, type A or super meticulously anal OCD is way preferred. Okay. It's just preferred. It's awesome. You're amazing if you have it, right? That's kind of the narrative that at least I perceive to be happening. So that's the second C, is to change the narrative. Change those narratives that we've adopted in our heads that aren't necessarily true narratives, but they're kind of the socially acceptable or socially common belief systems. And really, one person's clutter is another person's inspiration. And really, I can't ever get anything done, right? If I'm constantly putting things away all the time. Clean as you go is not really a thing for me. I wish it were. It's too difficult. It takes too long. The next fire is already burning. And so I have to go put that one out. And, partially that's because I have 8 kids and I got to get to the next thing. I value people over my house being totally meticulous, right? I could not be doing a podcast. I could be cleaning my house right now, but I don't want to. It's picked up to the point where I can find everything. So that's great for me. And then secondly, I wouldn't get to ever have an opportunity to sit down and carve out time to do this, which hopefully makes a difference to a person out there here or there who maybe can identify with one thing that I'm saying and can know that they're not alone. So compare and despair, elimination of that whole idea, changing the narrative, right? And telling ourselves that we are not necessarily bad people or lazy because we may have a cluttered house. I can think of a billion movies where clutter is kind of the endearing part of a character. And the one that comes to mind right off the bat is Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. When Matt Damon goes to Robin Williams's office to get some counsel, I mean, Robin Williams's office is like a pit, man. There's like books everywhere, there's stuff everywhere, and he's, surrounded by the things he needs. He can see them visually. And that's what I had to do. I had to learn about myself and learn that I function best when I can see all my stuff. So that leads me to the third and final C, which is communication. Sometimes, particularly in marriages, okay, one spouse who's very meticulous and type A will think that they are helping the other spouse by coming along and just completely cleaning up that other spouse's whatever, nightstand, desk, side of the bed, closet, whatever it is. And then that other spouse will come home and just basically melt down into tears and just go, I can't find my stuff. And that's how I am. If someone messes with my situation and my setup and my piles, it's disastrous for me most times. So I have had to communicate to my husband or to my cleaning folks that this is where I need to have my stuff. Feel free to lift it up and like dust under it if you want, or, and thank you. Oh my gosh, because I would never survive without you. But this is how I need to be able to see it and find it, right? A good example of this is in my nightstand drawer, hanging out of my nightstand drawer because it doesn't really fit very well, which is another problem, but that's for another time, is having the right equipment to deal with your stuff, right? But I have a pair of noise canceling headphones that I sleep in so that I don't hear my husband snoring. God bless you. Sorry I mentioned that, but sorry, honey. But I don't want to lose sleep. So I've trained myself to sleep with noise canceling headphones on. And I also sleep with a sleep mask on. Okay. So I am like in my own sleep pod/zone, right? And so if I lose those items, or if someone comes along and picks them up and just goes, why are these here? And tries to shove them in a cabinet under the kind of nightstand drawer area, or takes them and puts them with my travel supplies or whatever. I am so screwed. And it will take me an hour minimum at night of panicking, running around, trying to find where my stuff is, because it's no longer where I can see it. That is just how I roll. It's like whenever I've been in the hospital, they bring you that tray that sits next to your bedside, and they put a water bottle with like a sock on the outside for the condensation, and they put your little Kleenex box and whatever else there. And so that's how I like to just have my stuff all set up. I just like to have it kind of where I can see it. It just brings me peace and comfort. I can grab my stuff. It's ready. Boom. Okay. Also, it has really helped me to be in self-acceptance of like, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. This isn't the least cluttered space on the planet. It is what it is. And I am treating myself to self-care by having my stuff where I can see it and where it is easily accessible and helpful to me. Like, sorry, not sorry. Okay. So that is how I have been able to deal with my clutter, is by those three avenues. Okay. So I think for me, the biggest one is the communication, honestly, telling other people and explaining to them what my needs are. Because a lot of times, especially if you have someone who helps you clean or a spouse who is type A, they can't really fathom how it's not helping you if they are not going to mess with your stuff. I also have had times where I've been so overwhelmed that I've had to say, hey, Andrew, I am so overwhelmed right now. Can you help me reorganize my shoes? Okay. And so I do have to ask for help sometimes. And I just have to humble myself and get over that and ask for help. Another domestic situation that comes to mind is making our bed. There was a brief period of time during the pandemic, like for 9 months, I woke up every day and I made my bed. And that made me feel like there was something that I was in control of while the entire universe was just feeling so out of control. But I could wake up, I could make the bed, and it was like, there, I was in control of that and I did it. And it made me feel great. However, prior to the pandemic, and now that we are kind of semi out of it, okay, I have totally reverted to my ways, which is kind of straighten the sheet out, whatever the top cover, and that's it. That's what I do. I have my pillows set up the way I like them, the way I like to sleep on them. You know, my husband's CPAP thing is there where he can reach it. It's not disgusting. It's not a pit, but it's not a magazine. And if I were to have to set up my sleeping pillows every single night, like, shoot me now. No, thank you. Pass, hard pass. I mean, I'm really a believer in why would I waste that valuable energy? If I'm barely in that room all day anyway, it's not bothering me to look at an unmade bed because I'm not there. And maybe that was part of it, right? Was in the pandemic, I was there more often during the day than I am now. So, give yourself the freedom to, I would say, to consider adjusting as you go along, that it's okay. It is okay to feel like you can just keep your finger on the pulse of it and make changes as you go. And as you gain more tools and skills with ADHD, or as your loved one gains tools and skills in dealing with their ADHD. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening to the Chaplain's Chat.
Finally, here's your bailout bag.
Today, we have discussed determining what the problem is, because we can't solve the problem unless we know what the problem actually is, unless we first diagnose it. That takes courage, right? Having integrity takes courage. And sometimes that courage can manifest itself in the form of having the courage to go, you know what, this isn't like 99% of my friends' houses or spaces. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. That doesn't mean that it's not worthy or not as important as their space. But what it does mean is I'm choosing to have the courage to share that with others and to communicate it. And also to value myself and to say, I'm going to choose to say that that's okay. It is okay that I have some clutter around, because you know what? That's how I operate. That is my current operating system. Will it always be this way? Not necessarily, but it's how it is right now. And to care for myself and to choose myself and to choose love, I'm going to choose to honor this part of me in every single way today, to embrace my clutter and change the narrative. And once I know what I'm working with, then I can go, okay, well, my system is actually not broken, so I don't need to fix it. my system for me is not broken. I just need to make sure I'm communicating it so I can change that narrative. And it starts with eliminating the tendency and temptation to compare and despair. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. Keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.